Hi, everyone. My name is Fitsum Weldegiorgis. I am an industry fellow with the Sustainable Minerals Institute at the University of Queensland in Brisbane, Australia. I'm also an associate with the London-based International Institute for Environment and Development. The heading of my lecture today is Investing to Make Investment Work in the context of gender in mining governance. I emphasize investing on investment simply because we need to get governance right in order to make investment on promoting gender in mining successful. Now, you've learned in the lecture series about why women are excluded from participation in mining. You've also learned about gendered impacts of mining, as well as assessing those impacts. Also, you've learned about developing a business case for women inclusion and the role of the various stakeholders. Within or as part of lesson 4, my lecture will focus on mainly on the challenge to good governance in gender in mining. And also I will briefly talk about one suggested approach in order to address those challenges. Now, we know that there is so much needed to be done in order to improve the participation of women in mining. But we also know that there have been different investment interventions in various contexts, albeit sporadic. So I will mention a few examples of those investment interventions before I go into the challenges. So the first example is about initiating government enforced action plan in order to promote public sector banks. The idea is to really mainstream access to finance for women in particular. And this has been instrumentalized in India. The second example relates to gender sensitive provision of equipment, and in other instances, equipment loans. We've seen in some countries like Tanzania that governments partner with development organizations like the World Bank and also the private sector, in particular large-scale mining companies, in order to provide equipment. A third example that I would like to provide relates to a UNDP initiative, which is about innovative hire purchase scheme, which was piloted in Sudan with women gold miners. This scheme basically started out to address the issue of mercury in gold mining, but then such gains needed to match or to be matched by improvement in the way mining is conducted. So these are some of the examples that could be mentioned among many others, of course. But the problem with such investment initiatives is that support provided in the form of grants, loans, equipment, and also skills training often reaches to an insignificant number of women. So most women miss out. It could be maybe because of the discrimination that happens all the time, or it could be because of the lack of information that women suffer as well. And those kinds of initiatives are usually one-off, and so there is no follow-up to understand and evaluate the progression of women in their involvement in the mining sector. So they start out and then they die out. So it's just a short-term initiative. The second issue with such investment interventions relates to the lack of mining-related awareness on the part of the financial services providers, and on the other hand, the lack of knowledge about financial services, as well as the standard requirements on the part of the female miners as well. Another issue that we see often is in relation to corrupt governance. In many cases, we've seen elites wielding power and exploiting minors as well. So such investments do not end up benefiting the women on the ground. Another issue that we can mention is in relation to government policy. We've seen in a number of government policies the lack of specific provisions for women. You see gender mentioned in passing, but there is no really comprehensive policy provision to address the issues that women in mining face. So these are a few among many challenges that we can mention. Given that, I think when an investment decision is made, it's important to really understand the needs, priorities, strengths, and potential of women before we even embark on addressing those problems. In one of the research outputs we put out in the last couple of years, which is also part of the reading list you have, I have put a diagram which simply maps out the different activities in which women are involved in the mining sector. So the idea of that mapping exercise is really to look at, on the one hand, the extent of women's involvement in various activities, and on the other hand, the level of benefits that they generate per activity. So you have on one extreme where huge number of women are involved, such as in ore processing, like sieving, sorting, and so on. But then that kind of activity does not give them much benefit. On the other spectrum, you see women, very few women, in fact, a handful of women, involved in the upper level of the value chain, such as they process the minerals themselves and they sell the product. So that kind of activity gives them better benefit compared to the other extreme. So that kind of mapping is really important before we embark on investing to promote women's participation in mining. But to get that kind of information and other really important data about women in mining, it's important to engage women themselves. So you engage women themselves in a more action-oriented and process-based dialogue. This is the kind of dialogue that IIED has expertise and experience over a number of years. And it's also helpful to understand the strengths, the issues, the priorities of women. But dialogue efforts and even governance for that matter needs to follow an institutionalized approach. How do you do that? I think one way of doing that is to instrumentalize women's associations. I mean, we have seen a long and proud tradition of groups of women in various countries. I'll mention examples. For example, in Tanzania, we have the TAWOMA, Tanzania Women's Miners Association. We have the Zambia Women in Mining, as WIM. We also have the Wives of Miners in Bolivia. And more recently, we have the MAWIMA, Malawi Women in Mining Association. We have also the RENAFEM in the DRC. So these women associations can provide an essential network around women because they are there. They are among the women miners, and then they understand various aspects of gender involvement in the mining sector. They also can play a vital role in terms of informing policy, in terms of enabling government, donors, also the private sector, including the large-scale mining sector, in terms of understanding the issues, the gender issues of mining, as well as the opportunities that are there to help their participation. They also could be useful in terms of streaming or streamlining investment aimed at helping women's participation in mining. Also, women, as I said, being at grassroots level, they could be crucial in terms of advocating and representing women themselves, representing their interests, their needs and priorities. So it's quite crucial to involve the women in women's associations in various countries. But these associations need strengthening. And I will mention 3 areas in which strengthening is needed. The first area relates to organizational and leadership structure. I mean, we have seen most of these associations are initiated by individual women that are champions in the sector. And also, these associations are mostly run by voluntary women as well. So they are driven by individuals themselves rather than by leadership that is based on merit. So there is really a need to have a more structured leadership to run these associations. The other issue in terms of organization and leadership is that most of these associations are rooted in government structures. And what that implies is that there is a loss of credibility around these associations. And so most of the women miners do not trust these associations because they believe they are part of government. So there is a lack of independence in that aspect. The other issue is that most of these associations are headquartered in the capital cities, for example. So that has a disadvantage because the women that are located in the mining sites miss out on important meetings where they can voice their issues. So it's really critical to make sure that the leadership structure as well as the organizational structure is right. The second strengthening around these women miners associations relates to the governance and institutional capacity. Most of the time, associations suffer from weak institutional capacity. There is competition for power, unfortunately. There is weak leadership. There is also corruption in some cases, most of the time dominated by business interests. So the institutional capacity needs to be improved. They have to be institutionalized, in other words, but also the way those institutions are run should be more accountable and responsible towards their objectives. The third aspect where strengthening is needed is finance. This is a critical issue that we understand from our engagements with various women in mining in different countries. Finance is needed to not only to help promote areas such as equipment, skills, and so on, but also in terms of strengthening the associations, the institutional capacity as well. So finance is crucial. So finally, I know that one might say, why not use or make use of already existing institutions and make them more gender equal? But I think gendered institutional structures are just as intractable. And so it's really important to involve the women themselves in order to promote a trustworthy and also ownership of the structures that are really critical in order to promote this investment in gender in mining. Thank you very much. I'll leave it there.